What would you do if you discovered that your entire life was a lie? That the person sleeping next to you every night had been planning your destruction for 2 years? That's exactly what happened to one woman who decided to test her husband's loyalty. And what she found will make you question everything you think you know about trust. She kissed her husband goodbye at 7 in the morning on a Friday, told him she was driving 3 hours away to help her cousin through a crisis. He smiled at her, the same smile she'd seen for 16 years, hugged her tight, said, "Drive safe. I'll miss you." She loaded her suitcase into the trunk, started the engine, and waved as she pulled out of their driveway. He stood there watching until she turned the corner. A perfect husband, a perfect goodbye. But at 7:23 that morning, she wasn't 3 hours away. She was parked 2 blocks from her own house. Engine off, heart pounding, phone on silent, watching, waiting. After 16 years of marriage, she had finally decided to do something she never thought she'd do. Something that made her hands shake and her stomach turn. Test him. See what he would do when he thought she was gone, when he thought no one was watching. And what she discovered over the next 48 hours didn't just confirm her worst fears. It revealed a plan so calculated, so carefully constructed, that it had been in motion for 2 entire years. Documents with her name on them, bank accounts she never knew existed, legal papers already drafted and waiting, and a timeline that ended with her complete destruction. Everything she'd built, everything she thought was theirs, gone. This is the story of how one woman tested her husband's loyalty and uncovered a betrayal that went far beyond anything she could have imagined. Her name is Sarah, and this is what she found. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we dive deeper, please like this video and subscribe. Also let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's incredibly special, knowing our stories are resonating with people across the globe. Before I tell you what she found in that house, before we explain what those documents meant, you need to understand something. Sarah wasn't a suspicious wife. She wasn't paranoid. She wasn't the kind of woman who checked phones or demanded passwords. For 16 years she trusted her husband completely, believed in him, defended him to friends who occasionally raised eyebrows at his behavior. So what changed? What made a woman who believed in loyalty and commitment decide to lie to her own husband? What signs had she been missing for months, maybe years? And when she finally came back to that house, when she used her own key to enter her own home, what exactly was waiting for her on the other side of that door? Was it another woman? Was it evidence of an affair? Or was it something far worse? Something that would prove her marriage had been dead long before she ever suspected it. The answer is more disturbing than you can imagine, but to understand what she found, you need to know who they were and who he pretended to be. Sarah Mitchell was 41 years old when this story took place. She met David when she was 25 at a charity fundraiser where he was volunteering. He was 27 then, working as a financial consultant, ambitious, charming, but not in a showy way. He felt genuine. They talked for hours that first night about their dreams, their values, what they wanted from life. David told her he wanted stability, a real partner, someone to build something meaningful with. She wanted the same things. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony, with family and close friends. Simple vows. The first decade was everything she'd hoped for. They bought a house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, even though they didn't have children yet. They both worked hard. David moved up steadily at his firm, senior analyst, then lead consultant with his own client base. Sarah advanced in her career as a social worker, eventually running programs that helped families in crisis. They were partners, true partners. They made decisions together, supported each other's ambitions, spent weekends renovating their house or exploring small towns nearby. Friends used to say they were relationship goals, that they had one of those rare marriages that actually worked. But somewhere around year 12, things began to shift. Small things at first. So small, Sarah convinced herself she was imagining them. David started working longer hours, coming home at 8, 9, sometimes 10 at night. He said his client base was expanding, that he needed to put in the time now for their financial security later. She understood. She often worked late too, helping families through crisis, so she didn't question it. Then came the business trips. David had traveled occasionally before, but now it seemed like he was gone every other week. Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, Richmond, always cities within a few hours' drive. He'd leave Wednesday, return Friday, call her every evening from his hotel room, tell her about his day, ask about hers. Everything seemed normal, except for this growing distance she felt but couldn't name. About 6 months before Sarah decided to test David, the red flags became impossible to ignore. She noticed he'd become protective of his phone in a way he never was before. He used to leave it on the counter, on the coffee table, charging by the bed. Now it was always in his pocket or face down on the nightstand. He added a passcode she didn't know. When she asked about it, casually, carefully, he said his firm required it. Security reasons, client information on his device. It made sense, but it also felt like a lie. Then she noticed discrepancies in their finances. David and Sarah had always had joint accounts, complete transparency about money. But one evening, while looking for a tax receipt, she opened David's laptop and saw a banking website she didn't recognize. Before she could click anything, David came home. She closed the laptop, felt guilty for snooping, but that image stayed with her. An account she didn't know about, in a bank she'd never heard him mention. Why? Sarah started paying closer attention to his business trips. They had a family location-sharing app for safety in case of emergencies. One night, David said he was in Atlanta for client meetings, but his location showed Knoxville. She asked him about it. He said the app must be glitching, that he was definitely in Atlanta. He said it so smoothly, so confidently. She didn't push, but she also didn't believe him. And then came the text message. It was a Sunday afternoon in March. David's phone was charging in the kitchen. Sarah walked past just as a notification appeared on the lock screen. The message said, "Missing you already, last night was perfect." Her heart stopped. She stood there staring at those words, trying to convince herself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe it was a client, maybe it was a colleague being overly friendly. Maybe. But she knew. If she's honest with herself, she had known for months. David was having an affair. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Sarah spent the next week in agony. Part of her wanted to confront him immediately, demand he explain that text, the distant behavior, all the little lies that had accumulated over months. But another part of her hesitated. What if he denied everything? What if he had a reasonable explanation? What if she destroyed their marriage over nothing? What if she was wrong? She talked to her closest friend, Rachel. Without giving specific details, she asked, hypothetically, what should someone do if they suspected their spouse of cheating? Rachel said confrontation was always the right approach, that relationships need honesty, direct communication. But Sarah wasn't sure she could handle a confrontation without proof. She needed to know with certainty before she blew up her entire life. Then, one evening, David mentioned another upcoming business trip. He'd be gone 4 days, Wednesday through Saturday. Important meetings with potential clients in Richmond. Sarah nodded, said she hoped the trip went well. But as soon as David went to bed that night, she made a decision. She was going to test him. She would tell David she also had a trip planned, that she'd be visiting her cousin Rebecca 3 hours away. She'd leave the same day he left. But instead of actually going to Rebecca's house, she would stay nearby. She would watch and wait. If David came home alone and behaved like a faithful husband, then she'd know her suspicions were wrong. But if he brought someone to their house, if he acted like a single man when he thought she was gone, then she would have her answer. It felt manipulative, dishonest. It went against everything she believed about trust in marriage. But she also felt like she had no other choice. She had asked David if everything was okay. He said, yes. She had tried to talk about the distance between them. He said he was just stressed from work. She had given him every opportunity to be honest with her. Now she needed to see the truth for herself. On Tuesday evening, Sarah told David about her trip. She said Rebecca was going through a difficult time with her marriage, that she needed someone to talk to. She'd drive up Wednesday morning, stay through the weekend. David's reaction was interesting. His eyes brightened, just for a fraction of a second. Then he rearranged his face into an expression of concern. He asked if Rebecca was okay, if there was anything he could do to help. Sarah said no, that Rebecca just needed a listening ear, some time together. David said he understood. Then he mentioned, almost too casually, that it was good timing. Since they'd both be traveling, neither of them would be alone in the house. Sarah agreed. Good timing. Almost too convenient. Over the next 24 hours, she made careful preparations. She told her job she was taking personal days. She booked a small hotel room across town under her maiden name. She withdrew cash, no credit card trail David could accidentally see. She told Rebecca what she was planning, made her promise not to answer if David tried to call to check her story. She felt like she was planning a covert operation, not trying to figure out if her husband was faithful, but she was too far in now. There was no turning back. Wednesday morning arrived with clear skies. Sarah and David moved around their bedroom in a choreographed dance, one they'd performed hundreds of times. But now, Sarah was paying attention. She noticed David packed more clothes than usual for a 4-day trip. She noticed he took extra care with his appearance. She noticed everything. They said goodbye in the driveway. David hugged her, told her to drive safely, said he hoped Rebecca would be okay. Sarah looked at his face, searching for any sign of guilt, nervousness. She saw nothing but the same pleasant expression he always wore. If he was lying, he was very, very good at it. Sarah watched David drive toward the highway. Then she got in her own car and drove in the opposite direction. But instead of heading north to Rebecca's house, she drove 15 minutes across town to the hotel where she'd made her reservation. She checked in quickly. Cash only. Maiden name. The room was small, impersonal, a view of the parking lot. Sarah set her bag down, sat on the edge of the bed, tried to steady her breathing. What was she doing? Was this crazy? Was she destroying her marriage by not trusting her husband? Or was she finally doing what she should have done months ago and finding out the truth? She pulled out her phone, opened the family location app. David's location showed him on the highway heading south toward Richmond. At least that part was true. He was actually leaving town. Sarah spent the rest of Wednesday in that hotel room, watching David's location move through Virginia. By evening, he was in Richmond. His location stayed at what appeared to be a hotel near downtown. She felt a small sense of relief. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe he really was on a business trip. Maybe all those red flags had innocent explanations. But Sarah didn't leave her hotel room. She waited. Thursday morning, David's location showed him at various businesses around Richmond. Sarah assumed he was attending meetings. She tried to distract herself. Television, reading. But she couldn't focus. By evening, his location was back at the Richmond Hotel. Thursday night, Sarah barely slept. She kept checking the location app, expecting to see something that confirmed her fears. But everything looked normal. David appeared to be exactly where he said he'd be, doing exactly what he said he'd be doing. Maybe this whole test was a terrible mistake. Friday morning, 6 o'clock, Sarah woke up and checked the location app out of habit. And everything changed. David's location was no longer in Richmond. It showed him on the highway heading back home. Sarah sat up in bed, confused. He wasn't supposed to return until Saturday. Why was he coming back a day early? She watched his location move steadily north through Virginia. By 9 o'clock, he was only an hour away from their house. This was it. If he was coming home early and he thought she was still at Rebecca's house, this was when she would see the truth. Sarah got dressed quickly. Jeans. Plain jacket. Hair pulled back. Sunglasses. She needed to watch their house without being easily recognized. She drove to her neighborhood, parked 2 blocks away on a side street. From there, she had a partial view of their driveway. She slid down in her seat and waited. At 10:15, David's car pulled into their driveway. Sarah watched him get out carrying his small travel bag. He looked around the neighborhood casually, then let himself into the house. Sarah's heart was pounding. She waited. After about 15 minutes, David came back outside. He went to his car and moved it into the garage instead of leaving it in the driveway. That was strange. He never parked in the garage during the day. It was as if he was hiding the fact that he was home. Sarah waited for an hour watching their house. Nothing happened. No one came or went. She started to feel foolish, sitting in her car, spying on her own house. Maybe David had just come home early because meetings ended. Maybe he was enjoying having the house to himself. Maybe she was completely wrong about everything. But just as Sarah was about to give up, about to drive back to her hotel, another car pulled into her driveway. The car was a silver sedan Sarah didn't recognize. A woman got out, younger than Sarah, maybe early 30s, long dark hair, professional clothes. She carried a large tote bag and a shopping bag from an expensive grocery store. The woman walked to the front door and rang the bell. David opened it almost immediately. He was smiling. He hugged the woman, and they went inside together. Sarah sat in her car, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to think. There it was. The confirmation she had both expected and desperately hoped wouldn't come. David was having an affair. He had lied about his trip so he could spend time with this woman in their home while Sarah was supposedly out of town. Sarah watched the house for 2 more hours. The curtains were closed. She couldn't see what was happening inside, but she could imagine it. The violation of it made Sarah physically ill, but she had to know more. So Sarah did something she never imagined she would do. She got out of her car and walked toward her own house. Her hands shook as she quietly inserted her key into the front door lock. She turned it slowly, hearing the mechanism click open. She pushed the door open inch by inch, holding her breath. The house was quiet, but she could hear voices coming from the kitchen. Sarah moved silently across the entryway toward the sound. She could hear David laughing, dishes clinking, water running. They were cooking together in her kitchen, using her things, living in her space like she didn't exist. Sarah moved closer until she could see them. David and the woman were standing at the kitchen island. In front of them were papers spread across the counter. What she saw made her blood run cold. The papers weren't love letters. They were legal documents. Her eyes focused on the words at the top of one page. Petition for divorce. Sarah's knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the wall to steady herself. David was planning to divorce her. But what was worse, spread out beside the divorce papers were bank statements, property assessments, retirement account information. He wasn't just planning to leave her. He was planning to take everything. Sarah's vision blurred with rage and shock. There was a detailed spreadsheet, columns labeled Joint Assets and Strategy for Division. Notes in David's handwriting about how to move money without her knowledge. And there was even a timeline. According to the notes, David planned to file for divorce in June. He would claim irreconcilable differences, argue that Sarah's focus on her career had created distance in their marriage. The manipulation of it was staggering. Sarah listened as David explained something to the woman, whose name she now understood was Jennifer. Jennifer wasn't his affair partner. She was his lawyer. David was saying that if they filed in a certain way and moved certain assets beforehand, he could minimize what Sarah would get in the settlement. Jennifer asked if Sarah had any idea what was coming. David laughed. He actually laughed. He said Sarah was too trusting, too busy with her work to pay attention. He said she wouldn't see it coming until the papers were served. By the time she realized what was happening, it would be too late. She would lose the house, lose half her retirement, lose everything, while he started fresh with someone else. Sarah realized with horror this wasn't even about Jennifer. David had another woman he was planning to be with after the divorce. Jennifer was just his attorney, helping him strategize how to leave his wife with as little as possible. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway listening to her husband plan the destruction of her life. Every instinct screamed at her to burst into that kitchen, to confront him, to demand explanations. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the realization that confronting David now would only put her at a disadvantage. If she revealed what she knew, he would adjust his plans, hide evidence, move money faster. But if she stayed silent, if she let him think his plan was still secret, she could prepare her own strategy. So, Sarah did the hardest thing she had ever done. She backed away from that kitchen silently, carefully. She moved to the front door, opened it inch by inch, and slipped outside. She walked back to her car with tears streaming down her face and drove away. Back at her hotel, Sarah collapsed on the bed and cried until she had no tears left. But once the crying stopped, something else took its place. Clarity. Cold. Sharp. Absolute clarity. David thought he was the only one who could plan. He thought Sarah was too naive and trusting to see what was coming. He was wrong. That version of Sarah died the moment she saw those divorce papers on her kitchen counter. The woman who emerged from that hotel room the next morning was someone different, someone who understood that loyalty unreturned is just exploitation, someone who knew that sometimes the only way to survive betrayal is to be more strategic than the person betraying you. Sarah spent the rest of Friday and all day Saturday building her own strategy. First, she called a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but the best divorce attorney in the city, a woman named Patricia Chen who had a reputation for being brilliant and relentless. Sarah explained the situation. She told Patricia everything she had seen and heard. Patricia listened carefully, then said something that gave Sarah hope for the first time in days. What David was doing, the hidden accounts, the transferred assets, could be considered fraud. If they moved quickly and strategically, they could not only stop David's plan but use it against him. Over the next 48 hours, they worked methodically. A forensic accountant discovered David had hidden over $130,000. Patricia filed emergency motions to freeze all accounts. By Sunday evening, Sarah had a plan as calculated as David's. Monday morning, she drove home. David was in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up, surprised. "Sarah, you're home early," he said, smiling. She pulled out a folder and placed it on the counter. Inside were copies of everything. The divorce petition, the spreadsheets, the hidden money, photographs of Jennifer's car in their driveway. David's face went white. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Within a week, David signed an agreement giving Sarah the house, her full retirement, and half of everything he'd tried to hide. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming. 6 months later, the divorce was final. Sarah kept everything that mattered and started fresh, this time with her eyes wide open. Sometimes the person you trust most is the one planning your downfall. But sometimes, the loyal heart proves to be the sharpest mind. What would you have done in Sarah's place? Would you have confronted David immediately or played the long game? Think about the people in your life. Are you paying attention to the small signs? If this story moved you, there's another one coming that will shake you even more.